September 15th or so, 16th. On this Wednesday, 2015, I'm not going to be reading my introduction. I reserve that for Mondays so we can get to other matters. For the record, note that the introduction has been spoken of, and I shall now continue. So welcome to the broadcast. And may the Lord bless you as you seek to do His will according to His Word today, the AV 1611 Reformation English Bible. In the midst of a world system that is completely in the hands of the devil, and as he rules the kingdoms of this world, the nations of this world, he rules them through the Roman papacy. The Roman papacy rules the world. That is Political Science 101. If your college or university doesn't teach you that, well, then they're liars, and they don't want you to know that. Because I guarantee you there are professors in your university who know it. But they're not going to tell you. Because, you see, you don't have the right to know. All you have the right to do is to work and to labor and to have children so that they can replace you in your slavery. So when you die, they can step up and put the shackles on and continue to serve the papacy, paying the popes heavy progressive socialist communist income tax, paying the property tax, working 2 and 3 jobs, and just working yourself to death because, you see, your only purpose is to labor for the pope and the governments that he controls. And you're also to fight his crusades, so white men, just remember that when you get drafted to go fight overseas, you're not heroes, you're suckers, just like I was. And you're going to be fighting for the Pope of Rome in his crusades, which is coming up. You're going to have a great big 2-front war, one front in the Far East, the other front in the Middle East, and you're going to be waging that crusade for the Pope. Not for me, not for the American people, not for America's Constitution and Republican form of government, which has been gone since March 9th, 1933. You will be fighting for the Pope of Rome. So your only purpose in life, the American dream, is to fight the Pope's crusades, work the Pope's corporations, and pay the Pope's income tax on your labor. That's where we are today in 2015. And I'm the only one that's going to tell you that. There may be a couple others here and there throughout the world, but not like we're doing here on 24/7 World Radio. I trust it goes to all these different nations. I hope they understand that the papacy runs America, and that the American people, for the most part, have decided to submit to the slavery and do what they're told. And as a result, the servitude continues, the aggression against foreign nation continues. And so until God steps in and starts to put an end to this, it's going to continue. And I see the only way that this can happen is, number one, He sends a great awakening, that people will turn to the Lord and turn to the Reformation AV 1611 Bible, because all the other Bibles are heresy. All the other Bibles are Westcott and Hort, Jerome's Latin Vulgate, pro-Jesuit, pro-Roman Catholic heresy, save maybe the Geneva and a couple of the other previous English Bibles, but the AV 1611 is the Reformation English Bible God has blessed for the last 400 years, and if we seek to be in that blessing, we need to return to His book, which He has obviously blessed. And with the Great Awakening and return to His book, then a return to obedience to it. And part of that obedience is resistance to political tyranny, which was championed by Knox and Calvin. Those are historical facts. They never taught unlimited submission to tyranny. And so when God's people begin to stop submitting to unlimited tyranny and want to do something about it and spend their time and money and effort and prayers and lives to resist this, then the Lord will begin to intervene. Until such time, He's not going to. Because we're going to reap what we sow when we don't do anything about it. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I've determined to do something about it. I'm going to start a new white nation. That's right, for all you self-loathing white women who hate yourselves because you're white, just go away. Don't bother me in my new country. You can stay in this empire. Go ahead, stay here. See what happens to you. Don't come to my country, because in my country we have white male domination, supremacy. We have white male Bible-believing men who are running the country. The women stay home and run their little businesses out of the home and raise children, but it's the man who rules in my country. Now, if that's offensive to you, don't come. don't come to my country. And if you're such a believer in diversity, then I have a right to espouse this political and biblical doctrine that was adhered to in this country for over 150 years. No, I'm not a communist, and I never will be. The doctrine of universal equality between men and women is communism. Feminism is communism. It's wicked. It's evil. It's antichrist. And the Bible-believing women of God will have nothing to do with it. Which are very few of them, by the way. So, advocating a new nation, somewhere here in Pennsylvania, where we can be white, Bible-believing, male-dominant to the exclusion of blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. That's right, because you see, I'm white. I'm a white American, and this is my country. It's been taken from me. This military government has taken it from me. And there's no place in the world for white men who believe the Bible to go. If there was, I'd move out of here. But there is no place. South Africa's getting wrecked. Rhodesia's destroyed. Great Britain's destroyed. The Netherlands are destroyed. Germany is destroyed. The Scandinavian countries infested with hateful, savage blacks and Muslims. They're destroying Sweden. Now they're bringing the Syrians into more in Europe so we can have more of the other dark races in Europe. Because those white people can never be allowed to unite around a common race, common language, common faith, common Reformation Bible, and resist the Roman papacy. It's not going to happen. And the Jesuits are the masters of this forced race mixing, nation mixing miscegenation. It's not of God. It's of the Jesuit order, because it's part of their counter-Reformation design to prevent white peoples from uniting as a common people, race, language, and culture around the Bible to then throw off the temporal power of the Pope, as was done by England, Scotland, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all the historic white Protestant Western nations that have brought blessing and technology around the world. We've been a blessing to all the nations of the world. We have to be decimated. All you Asians, do you like driving those nice cars? Guess who made them? White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. That's who made them, especially in Germany. You like the BMW? You like those great cars that the Germans produced? They were historically white and Protestant. The greatest technology of the world comes out of Germany, and it's because of its Protestant roots and its freedom of conscience that it once had. Doesn't have it anymore. You like living in a concrete building? You like high technology, my Asian friends? You like the beautiful concrete work in Malaysia and those other countries, and Japan and China? It's because white Protestants revived concrete work out of Rome that had died for over 1,500 years. We brought concrete back with rebar, and that's why there are concrete structures around the world, because it comes from white Protestant nations. Now, will you help me preserve it a little bit? Because look how you've been blessed. All you blacks like sitting on a toilet and defecating and urinating. Do you like doing that? It's an invention of white Protestant America. Sewage disposal and processing is all a result of chemical engineering, championed and perfected here in white Protestant nations of the West. Apart from that, you Asians would still have honeypots in China where you take your urine and your feces in a bowl and throw it in a common honeypot. Same way with you blacks. Same way with you Hispanics. It's because of white nations that you're able to go to the bathroom and flush the toilet. Now, why do you tag me as some sort of a hateful racist when I want to preserve the people that brought a blessing, these kinds of blessings to you and to ourselves? Why do you women tag me as some sort of sexist when I'm merely advocating what the Bible advocates? Male domination. The supremacy of the father. A patriarchal society. What is wrong with that? That's what God has ordained in his book. But you will have none of it. You think your opinion is equal to that of your husband's. And it's not. It's to help him. It's to give him some advice so he can listen to it and reconsider. And generally, oftentimes, the wife is right. But that doesn't mean you run anything. You're in a condition of subordination, and you ought to look like it. Your hair ought to be long, your head ought to be covered, and you ought to have a dress on. That spells one thing: subordination. That's your place of protection. And it's this kind of white Protestant culture with the women in subordination to their men that built Western civilization that has resulted in all the wonderful inventions that we enjoy today. Do you like getting on your phone and talking to somebody? You like that? You can thank God for the Protestant Reformation. Without it, we'd be shouting across the street to one another. We wouldn't have communication. The father of communication, his name is Samuel Morse. He was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant American. The reason why we have iPhones and telecommunication everywhere is because of America. White Protestant and Baptist America with the rights of freedom of conscience and freedom of invention. Without this nation, they don't exist. And by the way, for you Jews that are listening, we never persecuted you. We held to Genesis 12 and 15, and we refuse to persecute you simply for being Jews. That wicked sinner Ulysses S. Grant tried it during the war between the states, and Lincoln put an end to it real quick. So what's your beef? Why do you hate me? Why do you resent me, women, white women? Why do you resent me, black man? Huh? I'm just trying to help you. And furthermore, don't tell me about any high cultures blacks built in Africa. It never happened, including Egypt. If it wasn't for you black men, you've only been out of the bush for 600 years. Only 600 years. That's a fact. A lady from South Africa said that to me one day, and I said, you know what, you're right, lady. Do you enjoy the textiles that you have? Do you enjoy the tennis shoes that you wear? Do you enjoy the pants that you wear? Do you enjoy the suits? Do you enjoy the watch on your wrist? Black man, do you like that? Do you like looking at your watch? Do you like pulling out your iPhone and calling your wife? Do you like all those things? You can thank God for the Protestant Reformation. And furthermore, you can thank God that your great-great-great-grandfather was slaves coming over here, because now you black men in America have it better than any other group of blacks in the world. That's why you don't go back to Africa, right? Who wants to go to Africa? It's a hellhole. Run by black savage tyrants like what's Zuma out of South Africa. Like Mugabe out of Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. You want to live under Robert Mugabe, black man? You want to live under Zuma out of South Africa, my black American brother? Do you want to live under those guys? I don't think so. Did you want to live under Idi Amin? I don't think so. You want to live here, but you want to complain and hate the white man every day, how it's only the white man that took all of this from us, and we have reparations coming, and we need to tax that white man to death to beat him further into the ground so we can have more and more and more and more and more. Isn't that right? Isn't that the way it is with you Black Panthers? You think you're going to come around and kill the white man? I tell you this, you start a Mau Mau uprising in America and you'll all be rounded up and sent to camps. And that's exactly what the Jesuits want, but you're too stupid to get it. You and Farrakhan and all those black savages busy serving the Pope of Rome with their Masonic rings on, inciting a black-on-white race war. Just know this. You've never defeated white men ever in world history. except when the blacks in the 25th dynasty took Egypt. Other than that, to my knowledge, it's never happened. And you're going to be decimated here, which is exactly what the Jesuits want. You think the Jesuits have any love for you, black men? Do you think the Jesuits wanted your best with the civil rights movement? Are race relations better or worse after the civil rights movement? I'll tell you, they're 1,000 times worse. It's like with Martin Luther King, that's what he wanted. He had no allegiance to black people. His allegiance was to the Roman hierarchy until he became disobedient and opposed Spelman's war in Nam, Archbishop Terence Cook's war in Nam, and so they killed him for that, just like they killed Kennedy. You want to be disobedient when we put you in power? We're going to kill you, boy. So you black men have a lot to be thankful in America for. And when I go through that Atlanta airport, I can count on one hand how many white people are working there. I was just through it last week. I said, where are the white people? Where are they? Go to Philadelphia, it's the same way. I refuse to go through that airport because it's the most racist, hateful, anti-white airport I've ever been in. And I don't go through there unless it's a connection. I'd never book a ticket out of Philadelphia. It's time to talk straight today, friends. And that's exactly what I continue to do. And if I go bust and this station goes down, well, then so be it. But I'm not compromising one word. Be back in a moment after station identification and prayer. White Protestant and Baptist dominance because of the blessing of God in that we championed His Word. We got the Bible into the hands of the common man in the Asian nations, in the Arab nations, to the Jews, to the Hebrew Jewish Israelites, to the European nations, to the African nations, and to South American nations. The ones who did that were white, Anglo-Saxon, American, Baptist, and Calvinist, and Protestant Calvinistic peoples. So therefore, you guys in South America and Chile, you owe us. You have a debt to us. You like the Bible getting down to South America and breaking the power, the temporal power of the Pope and the spiritual power down there, and so you Hispanics down there can have a life before God, have eternal life with Christ in glory because some white man got the Bible to you and translated it into Spanish Valera version or that particular Reformation Bible you used. Are you thankful for that? You owe us. You owe us at least a thank you. And you owe us some support to this broadcast and this radio station. You owe us. Oh, you Mexicans down in Mexico, you're thankful that the Bible, the gospel's been taken down to you so you can hear the word of God against your tyrannical government down there run by the Pope out of Mexico City. Are you thankful that we got the gospel to you? I would hope so. You owe us. Are you thankful that I wrote my book, Vatican Assassins, so you can see what the Jesuits have done to Mexico when they murdered Benito Juarez, your greatest Mexican leader in history, killed by Jesuits, poisoned at his desk in 1872? Are you thankful that I told you what the Jesuits have done to your country? And the Secession Rebellion in the early 1900s killed 1 million people. Do you like the fact the Jesuits killed 1 million of you Mexicans, huh? You owe me for telling you that. You Brazilians down in Brazil, tremendously wealthy country, the size of the United States, or maybe even bigger, full of wonderful mineral rights and natural resources. You know what's happened? The Jesuits run Rio and they run Brasilia, and you'll never have a middle class down there because they'll be damned before they will ever allow a race-mixed, miscegenated people to ever arise to a middle class. And if you want to see something that's going to break your heart, you just look at those poor Brazilian children that are garbage scroungers. Walk on top of these garbage pits and piles, and they're looking for something to eat. And the guys running the big tractors and the backhoes take turns trying to see if they can hit those children off the piles with their buckets. You go down to Brazil, you're wearing a Rolex watch, you better be careful because they'll cut off your hand just to pull the watch off your arm. That's the kind of savagery that they've been driven to because of Roman Catholic political and economic oppression in Latin America. And it's maintained, the dictators are kept in power down there in Latin America because of the Pope's CIA. Because of evil white men serving the Pope of Rome. That I have set my face against, to preach against and to expose. By the grace of God. Just watched an hour or so special in Arbenz when he was driven from power in Guatemala by the CIA, Alan Dulles, and those other Knights of Malta, and they replaced him with a military dictator and have killed thousands of Guatemalans. I told you. Who did it? Francis Cardinal Spellman. They even interview E. Howard Hunt on that special video, and he tells you of all the intelligence communities, the Jesuits have the highest intelligence community of all. They know everything that's going on. That's just what I'm telling you. Why does E. Howard Hunt say it and you believe it, but when I tell you, you don't believe it? Why? That wicked sinner, that murderer, that Kennedy assassin. All you blacks, as I've said, you got it better in white Protestant Western nations than any other place. You got it better in Canada, America, England, Netherlands, than any other countries in Africa or in the Caribbean. You know why? Because it was historically Protestant and white and tolerant. And instead of saying, you know what, I'm so thankful that I live in a historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant country as a black man, you're hypocrites and cowards because you're not going to say it because these other savage blacks are going to cut you up if you say that. They're going to call you an Oreo. They're going to say, man, listen to that dude. He's kissing up to the white man. When the fact of the matter is, without white culture that's historically Protestant, black men don't have anything. Nothing. Because they don't have anything in Africa. Because the military dictators down there put in power by the white power structure out of England and Rome and America keep those black savage dictators there to keep you black men down. That's right. And if they hate you in Africa, the same white power structure hates you here. When are you going to wake up? You owe me. You owe white Anglo-Saxon Protestants at least a thank you. How about you Asians? How about you Chinese, building beautiful cities? You Japanese, beautiful bridges. You know what technology that is? It's white Anglo-Saxon Protestant from America and Europe. The Netherlands, Sweden, the greatest shipbuilders in the world, the Swedes. White Protestant Lutherans, historically. You like great big cargo ships to transport your wares around the world? You can thank God for the steel-hulled ships that you have. You know who invented steel-hulled ships? White Protestant Americans. That's why we have steel-hulled ships. Internal combustion engines. What black nation invented those? What Asian nation invented those? What Hispanic nation invented those? None of them. They're inventions of white Protestant nations of America, Great Britain, and Germany. And now the Tesla. Now strictly driven by batteries. White Protestant America. The rights that we used to invent that were historically rights secured by white Protestants and Baptists in this country. Ain't no Catholics ever secured those rights. Oh, you Asians owe us. You owe us a thank you. You owe us white Protestants a thank you. And at least you can do is say, you know what? Phelps is right. Those people need to have their own country where they can be and Baptists to the exclusion of everybody else except the Jews, which Phelps says he's going to let them into his country, but there's not going to be no race mixing there. Because we're not going to corrupt the holy seed of the Hebrew Jewish. So, the Talmud with them? No, that's not allowed. But they're going to come into my country so we can have the blessing of God. Now, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with a white man wanting to be white and to have a posterity that's white? What's wrong with that? Is that evil and sinful? Is it evil and sinful because we don't want to miscegenate and race mix our seed so that the offspring will not have our strengths? Be they intellectual or physical or whatever? Is that what you expect me to do? Preach miscegenation and let's just mix it all up together? It's sin, it's evil, it's wicked because God created the races to keep mankind separate. He does not want us united. He wants us separated by nation. And a nation is noted by its race, language, and culture. And you lying academic historians, don't you tell me that that was the philosophy at the start of World War I. What started World War I was the Jesuits. When they used the assassination of the Archduke in Sarajevo to justify the beginning of World War I. And you know who has the pistol from that assassination? The Jesuits. I have a picture of a Jesuit holding the pistol of Princip, the assassin there. No, God instituted nations, and I'll tell you, in the millennial kingdom of Christ, there's going to be nations, and they're going to be divided according to race, language, and culture. It's not going to be one huge miscegenation. His Hebrew, Jewish, Israelite, his people will not be intermarrying with Gentiles during the millennial kingdom. The tribes will be kept pure, will be kept in their identity during the millennial kingdom. The land has to be divided up pursuant to Ezekiel 48 by tribe. How can that happen if they're not preserved? And he's going to keep them preserved. This crazy miscegenation is wrecking everything in North America, and I'm not going to participate. We need to racially and nationally separate by moving into an area somewhere here in Pennsylvania that's historically white and Protestant till the Catholics took everything over. When the Catholics took over Philadelphia, Scranton, Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and the Roman Catholics busy serving the Pope of Rome, making sure they have good old socialist, communist leaders of every stripe. There's not one that's not a socialist. Socialism is the economic design of the Jesuit order to wreck white, Protestant, middle-class peoples. It does not help us. It takes from us and deprives us of the fruit of our labor. That's what socialism does. That's what Fabian socialism's about. That's what socialist communism's about. Remembering that Marx was tutored by Jesuit General Peter Becks for many years. Communism is not a Jewish invention. It's a Jesuit invention. They protected it. They perfected it. On their reductions in South America, on their 59 reductions, numbering over 300,000 Guarani Indians as their slaves, and they perfected it for 150 years with a central bank, and each according to his ability, and to each according to his need. All that was perfected in South America under the Jesuit masters, the Jesuit fathers down there. And I, for one, I'm sick of socialism and communism because it's wrecked white people. They tax white men to give to the blacks and the Asians and the foreigners and the Mexicans and everything else around here. And if that's not enough, they'll use it to build their military-industrial complex so they can give billions to the military to wage wars for the Pope. The income tax is for the furtherance of communism, universal equality, to the ruinization of white Protestant middle-class peoples, and to the building of a huge military-industrial complex to oppress the world and to fight in all these nations. It is an empire run by the Jesuits out of Washington, using their high Masonic knights, their high Knights of Malta, their Knights of Columbus, and all their bully societies, the black men of bully society, like Martin Lucifer King. and the skull and bones like George W. Idiot Bush, and it goes on and on. But they're all secret society boys. They're in their little club, and if anybody threatens their power, they get to kill them using an intelligence op. You seen the Bourne Identity? A lot of that stuff's true. They have their assets in various cities. All you got to do is pick up the phone. We need to get this guy killed. And they do it. They do it. It happens every day. Fletcher Prouty says they do it every day. That's how they keep themselves in power. So you Asians owe us. You blacks owe us. You Hispanics owe us. You owe us. And the least you can do is start supporting this broadcast. It's going to tell you the truth, because you know what? I'm really on your side. I think black men ought to be self-governing, have their own nations in Africa to the exclusion of South Africa and Rhodesia. Those white people founded those countries. They built them. You leave them there and stop killing them. But the other nations, hey, have your own black nations. The other thing, why do you want to be under Islam? Why would you be under a religion that enslaved you and keeps you enslaved to this day? Why would you black men want to be Muslims? Are you out of your minds? If you want to read what the Muslims did to you black men, you need to read The History of Slavery by W.O. Blake and read about the slave drives they used to have when Muhammad Ali, the king slaver out of Egypt, used to round up all of his men, and they would have slave drives, and the blacks would be running through the woods and forests there, and ultimately capturing them and taking them to the slave markets in Cairo and Istanbul. Constantinople, now Istanbul. That's why there's blacks in the Middle East, because of the Muslim slave trade. But we don't hear anything about the Muslim slave trade. All we hear about those Protestants, and those Protestants were involved in the slave trade. Those Protestants in the slave trade were busy serving the Pope. Those British Protestants involved with the Royal African Company. You know who owned the Royal African Company out of Great Britain? The Stuarts. Tell you right there in Blake's work. The Stuarts owned it. The Roman Catholic, Protestant-hating Stuarts of England ran the Royal African Company with Charles II and James II. And you want to blame that on me because I'm white? We can't stand the Stuarts. We can't stand the Roman Catholic dynasties. They oppress us and kill us more than they ever killed you black men. Rob us of our Bibles. Want to take our guns from us so we can't defend ourselves when we're attacked by their agents, whatever they might choose to bring against us, like they're planning now here in North America. No, you black men owe us, and you need to send me a donation every month. That's what you need to do, as a thank you. Because you can read English. English is a white language. You can actually go to a library. Were there any libraries in Africa? I don't think so. Unless there's been some white men there that believe the Bible and saw the importance of a library. White men gave you the idea of going to a library and having a library. That's called freedom of speech and freedom of conscience. We believe that in freedom of intelligence and knowledge, so we have public libraries where people can go to those. This is a white Protestant and Baptist creation. There was no such thing in medieval Dark Age Europe. The people just didn't decide, well, we can go to the library because they were illiterate. The whole concept of literacy is a white Protestant design so that people can read the Bible. And when people read the Bible and obey it, righteousness exalts that nation. Be back in a moment for station identification and prayer here at 24/7 World Radio. Read that you can go to a library, that you can own a gun to protect yourself, that you can travel in an automobile, learn how to drive and be mobile. This is all white culture that you benefit from, so you owe us a thank you. You don't owe the Roman Catholics a thank you. You owe us white Protestants and Baptists a thank you. Because the white Roman Catholics generally hate your guts. White Roman Catholics never did anything for the black man except oppress him and enslave him. We white Protestants got rid of the slavery. Do you realize William Wilberforce, the white man in England who was a Protestant, worked for the last 20, 30 years of his life to abolish the slave trade in England? He spent every last dime, his life's blood, to do away with the ungodly and wicked slave trade that was being run by the Stuarts and those other Roman Catholics in the House of Lords that owned those companies. It was Wilberforce, a Protestant, that did away with it in 1807. And in America, we had no more slave trade as of 1808, 1 year later. White Protestant nations are the leaders in abolishing the slave trade, not the Roman Catholics, not the Muslims, and not the Jews, nor anybody else for that matter. You owe us at least a thank you. You Asians, the same game. Same thing. So, the last ones I want to deal with are you white women. Because I get all my hate mail and I get my attacks primarily from self-loathing white females. So I have something for you. And you know who I'm talking to, especially you, young lady. You don't have any kind of freedom of speech except as a result of the Protestant Reformation. You need to go to the library and spend some time and do a little work and see the state of white women in Europe during the Dark Ages. That's from 606 to around 1648. See what it was like to live then. You were for sex and children. And those Roman Catholic men in Europe slapped you around. You did what you were told. And if you didn't like it, they got rid of you and got somebody else. You women had nothing during the Dark Ages. Nada. And many of you women died in childbirth because of the filthy, unclean, unsterilized situation where the men would actually take their dirty hands and put them in your vagina after you'd given birth, and you get an infection and you die. What put an end to that? White, Protestant, Western medicine, aided and abetted by certain brilliant Jews. That's what ended that. That's why there's so very few childhood deaths at births, generally. Now, I'm not defending the medical inquisition here in this country. I'm just saying that due to certain progresses that took place in white Protestant Western civilization, you white women had your children living at birth. They lived longer. They got educated. They learned to be men of renown. The Brits and the Americans especially. You produced men like George Washington. Thank God for his name. Men like Oliver Cromwell, white men who believed the Bible, who loved their mothers and took care of them. You read the departure of Cromwell when he goes to Whitehall, when he becomes protector in his last visit with his dear mother. You read about that in Headley's The Life of Cromwell. You read about George Washington's departure from his mother as he goes to be president in Philadelphia, I believe. You read about it because the capital switches in 1801. You read about it. Washington loved his mother. You read about it in The Life of Washington by J.T. Headley. There's even a portrait of it. Read about it. These kinds of men were a result of white women who believed the Bible in submission to their husbands, aiding and abetting in the production of these kinds of leaders. You wonder why there's no leaders on the forefront? Because the white women are not godly. They're not submitted. They don't read the Bible. They think they're equal with their husbands, and they produce rebels for children that grow up to be sissies or savages. I look around my white race, and I'm concerned for it. They're all tattooed up. They're all pierced up. You think it's all okay? It's not okay! The Bible condemns tattoos. It condemns piercings. Oh, but we don't want to read the Bible, do we? So we'll do anything we want to do. And we think we can have the blessing of God. We think we can have some sort of a peaceful culture where there's righteousness. Never. 75% of all divorces are initiated by you white women. Reckon your men. Reckon your families. In my country, it'll be illegal for a white woman to get a divorce. It's illegal. Ain't happening. It's going to be just like it was in the first century, where the women could not get a divorce. They can leave, but they're not divorcing their husbands. You make that a law, 75% of all divorces are going to disappear. As part of having a patriarchal society. And that's what I'm going to have in Probapticum. We're going to have a white patriarchal society of men who believe the Bible. And although we differ on certain minor issues, eschatology and a few other things, and church polity, we agree on the major issues. As it was in the Niagara Bible Conference, they had all the basic Bible doctrines, the first 13. The 14th was the premillennial return of Christ, but that's really not critical, but the first 13, all 13 doctrines were championed by John Calvin in his Institutes. And for those of you who think the Niagara Bible College Conference was a bunch of heresy, you just need to read the Institutes and then repent and say you're sorry for your lies. But the ultimate problem, it's not with you blacks. It's not with you Hispanics. It's not with you Asians. It's not even with you white women. The ultimate problem is with us white men. That's the problem. The reason why everything's out of order is because we're out of order. We will admit that 1% of the population or less controls 99% of the wealth in this empire. You know why? Because that's obvious, but we'll never go on to say who owns it. And it ain't the Jews. The men who own all this power and all this property and all this wealth are white men, regardless of their religious demeanor, all busy serving the Pope of Rome. These are all your top white men in the intelligence communities, and if they're blacks in the intelligence communities and places of authority, they were put there by some white man. They're tokens. Same way with Asians and Hispanics. If there's Asians, Hispanics, and blacks in places of intelligence power, they're put there by some white men as tokens to prove we're not racist or prejudiced, when they're the biggest racist and prejudiced men in the world, these white power structure men. I know because I lived around them. So the problem is, us white men that are not in this power structure, we refuse to resist it. Why? Why do we white men, who are the most persecuted and discriminated against people in this country, especially white Protestants and Baptists, why don't we do something about it? Why don't we even get vocal about it? Why are we ashamed of our whiteness? Why are we apologetic of our great and fantastic white Protestant and Baptist history that did create a new world economic and political order of limited government and a middle-class people with gold and silver coins, owning property in allodial freehood with no property tax and no income tax? We created the most beautiful cultures in world history, and they're being decimated, and we say nothing and do nothing about it. I have a handful of supporters, monthly supporters, and these are dear men. I have one Canadian Chinese supporter as a lady. She sent me a series of checks, pre-post dated, for the next 4 years. $33 a month. Thank you, Sister Sally. Now there's an Asian lady who's thankful she lives in a historic white Protestant nation of Canada, thankful enough to at least support me a little bit what she can. Where are you white men? What is your problem? Is it that no one ever taught you of our history? Are you so ignorant not to know of what's been done in the last 500 years? Tell me, what do you do at night? You watch the boob tube? Or do you take a trip to the local library and start digging out some of these books I mentioned to you on my broadcasts? Oh, that would take work. And we can't work because we've worked hard all day. And I just want to sit in front of the boob tube and watch Blacklist or whatever we want to watch. And get brainwashed. And miscegenated. And self-loathing because we're white. That's what the TV does. It's over and over and over and over and over and over. Hate yourself because you're white. Hate yourself because you're white. Race mix. Bow down. Give it to all these other people. Are you so deluded and on drugs, the drugs of academia and public policy, that you can't stand up for your own race, white man? Because if you can't, you need to start counting the days, because it's not going to be long until America's just like Brazil, 50% white and 50% blacks and Hispanics and Asians and whatever. It's not going to be long till we're like Australia, where the Chinese have come in there by the tens of thousands and taken over industry and the business, and the white men down there are nothing. Isn't that right, my Australian listeners? Isn't that right, Brother Daniel? I mean, it's the same way in New Zealand. It's the forced miscegenation of white Protestant nations with Asians and blacks and Muslims and you name it, to ultimately decimate what is left of the Protestant Reformation. And because we white men don't stand up for this, and we refuse to get right with God, it's because of us that this success is happening. My brother Eric Rodriguez, he has a mutual broadcast on this radio station. He sent me a wonderful email a couple of days ago showing that it's a Jesuit that's behind all this forced nation mixing and miscegenation. I'll let him tell you about them. The Jesuits are behind this. It's part of the Council of Trent. It's part of the Counter-Reformation. And we get it. And you white men that are fathering white children, white girls, white boys, you are enslaving them by not standing up for your race, language, culture, and people, and maintaining a race, language, and culture and people. We want to have our food. We want to have steak and mashed potatoes. And we want to have coleslaw. And we want to have white Protestant cuisine. I visit some of my friends, they're Vietnamese. They have their wonderful Vietnamese cuisine. I enjoy it. And it's their nation. It's part of their national identity. They're preserving their national identity. Why aren't we? Why don't we preserve our national identity? Why do we have to like Mexican food better than anything else, or Italian food? That's not white Protestant. Why don't we have any white Protestant restaurants with white Dutch food? We have some in Lancaster County here, some Dutch food, which is white Mennonite Protestant food. Well, why can't we go into a major city? I want to go to a white Protestant food restaurant. I want to get some German food, or I want to get some English food. I want to get some Swedish food. I want to get some American food. Well, I want to go to an American restaurant. You know what an American restaurant is today? Burger King and McDonald's. God deliver us. Those will be illegal in ProBaptical too. None of those, they're out, because the Knights of Malta run those restaurants. PepsiCo runs Burger King, run by the Knights of Malta. W.R. Grace runs Taco Bell, Knights of Malta. Those restaurants ain't going to be in ProBaptical. Only mom and pop restaurants serving cultural cuisine. We're going to preserve our heritage, because without our linguistic heritage, our cuisine of our heritage, and so on, we don't have a people. What is our apparel? What apparel do we wear that denotes us as white Protestants and Baptists? You know what we wear? Jeans, T-shirt, straight-billed hat, because we're becoming Africanized. White men are becoming Africanized. So we want to look like blacks, these savage blacks, not general blacks, but the savage blacks. We want to have the straight-billed hat. We want to have the shoes that ain't laced up. We want to have a pants hanging down below our butts. And we want to walk around like we're some kind of savage that's just dropped out of a tree. That's what's happening to white young men. Put a few tattoos on there, slit our tongue so we have a tongue like a snake, and put some silver and some piercings in our eyebrows, and we're off to the races of savagery. None of that is going to be allowed in my country. None of it. You want to come to my country, you're going to look like a man, like a woman. You're going to dress properly. You're going to wear dresses, ladies. Men, you're going to wear loose-fitting pants. And we're going to have a culture that God's going to bless. Like we did one day, like we did before 1930s and 1920s and the wicked roaring 20s, and when all those Roman Catholics and their mafia started demoralizing the country with their follies and jitterbug, spreading leg dance and all that wickedness. Are you getting my drift this morning? We need to have a historic white Protestant and Baptist culture in a new nation somewhere in North America, to the exclusion of everybody else. And we need to pray about it. Oh, God can't do that. God can't do that. Oh, no, that's too big for God. Is it? Well, I'll tell you what's not too big for God. Detonations across this country, decimating major cities. That will drive us to repentance and seek His face and to then separate unto nationhood. It's either going to be that or we can do it now, but God is not going to tolerate this forever. It's my goal that we can serve Him peacefully in our own nation, in a little republic somewhere here in Pennsylvania, when the empire goes down. Brother Eric John Phelps will be back in a moment with our broadcast for the second hour, after the news, and after some serious reflection. Are we communicating? So, back with the second hour, Brother Eric John Phelps, concluding that the world owes us, white Protestants and Baptists. They owe us. And so do you Jews, for that matter. Come to our country, we don't persecute you. You owe us at least to thank you and to leave me alone when I'm advocating a new white nation somewhere here in North America. And stop denigrating what most white men really want anyway. And further, you need to financially help me. Because we're preserved, then our technology will be preserved. You Jews will have a place to go to and not be annihilated in North America. By the way, all you Jews know that you're going to be killed here? Don't you realize there's a conspiracy afoot to kill every Jew in North America? Now, I know you don't believe it, because your rabbis will never tell you that. Of course, they don't have any allegiance to you anyway, because it's the rabbis of Europe that didn't tell you about the Eurasian Jewish Holocaust coming at the hands of the Jesuits and the SS, and they just helped you to go to the concentration camps. That's right. Your major rabbis were traitors then, and they're traitors now. Because if they weren't, they would at least invite me to speak at their synagogues so that I can help you avert your mass murder here in North America. But they're not going to invite me. Because I'm just a goy, aren't I? One of the goyim. That the Talmud considers me as a beast. Right? So this is what we white men need. We need to oppose the white power structure wherever we are. Because the white power structure is run by the Jesuits through their high-level secret societies. And we're not joining any of those societies. And by the way, one more thing that has resulted in this horrible situation is the historic white Protestant churches are apostate. Pardon me. They're apostate because they've departed from the Bible. Many of their ministers are Masons. So that's just like the devil being in church. They go through their rite, Scottish rite, whatever it is, and I maintain every Freemason that goes through that rite of Hiram Abiff gets a devil. They're either demon-possessed or demon-oppressed, but whatever they touch is for the benefit of the devil because they've decided to worship him, taking the right of Hiram Abiff. And all these kind of people are running the churches, the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, Episcopalians. All the major Protestant denominations are decimated. And if you white men want to have the blessing of God, you've got to leave them. You've got to get out of there. You need to separate. Come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing. All these apostate Protestant and Baptist churches are unclean, full of Freemasons that have secrets that you're not to know about. Well, let's talk about some of these men, these powerful, rich white men, serving the Pope of Rome and building their mansions and castles on the sand of their good works, and they think they're safe. And the fact of the matter is, they're lost, undone, condemned, and they're a breath away from dying and descending into hell. They're to suffer until the great white throne judgment, when they will be resurrected and brought out and given an inquest on all their wicked deeds, their wicked words that they've ever spoken, and their deeds that they've ever committed. That's what's in waiting for you, white men of power. That's all right. You don't believe in hell. You don't believe in heaven. Okay, that's your faith. You can't prove it. You can't prove they don't exist. So that's your faith. Like Edward Bennett Williams, a powerful knight of Malta, said when he was on his deathbed, he said, "Now I'm about to meet the one who really rules the universe." That's right, Edward. And Edward, he's the risen Lord Jesus Christ, Edward Bennett Williams. And he sent you to hell as soon as you died. And that's where you're suffering now, Edward Bennett Williams. And all you other Knights of Malta with William F. Buckley and Clay Shaw and Bernard, what's his name, that aided Clay Shaw in their organization of killing Kennedy. They're all suffering in hell right now. All the bishops, all the Archbishop, Francis Cardinal Spellman, the most powerful churchman at the time, he's in hell right now. Yeah, that's right. All your power, all your money, all your influence didn't save you. And there you are with all those wicked works to follow you. For you wish you can give account of it, the great white throne. That's reality. That ain't religion. That's reality. Because the Bible is a book of literal reality. It's not a book of religion. Well, let's read about some of this literal reality in James chapter 5. You know, as a Calvinist, I just love the book of James because it calls me to good works because I've been justified before God. Luther called it a book of straw because he was seeking to overcome the damnable doctrine of work salvation. And I understand that because that's all Europe ever heard from the papacy. But with a proper mindset, we thank God for the book of James, that general epistle written by the half-brother of the Lord Jesus Christ. We read in James chapter 5, verse 1 and following. Go to now, ye rich men. Weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Weep and howl, Donald Trump. Weep and howl, Timothy Cardinal Dolan. Weep and howl, Rupert Murdoch. Weep and howl, Chris Matthews and Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and all your other Irish Catholics and apostate Protestants. Weep and howl, apostate Protestant George Herbert Walker Bush, you bonesman. Weep and howl. You're about ready to die and go to hell there. For your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. All those riches that you trusted in, all the big bank accounts, the banks that you owned around the world, all your riches and your fiat money and in your debits and credits, because you have no real money of gold and silver, all that fiat stuff, You're corrupted by them. You're corrupted by your riches. And your garments are moth-eaten. You got holes in. The emperor has no clothes. Yeah, they're really moth-eaten. They ate all the clothes right away. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. That's right, all you rich men, especially all you rich and powerful Jesuits. You stole all our gold in America. Given FDR working for you, given Executive Order 6102 on April 5th, and that executive order said that all persons, and those are the persons of the Emergency Banking Relief Act that amended Trading with the Enemy Act, all these artificial persons, they're not real private citizens, all the artificial persons, the corporations, the individuals, and whatever, all had to turn in all their gold by May 1st, Socialist Communist May Day. You know where all that gold is today? It's been melted down and put in gold bars, and there's probably 700,000 of them in the Federal Reserve Bank in New York City. Sitting on top of that gold mountain are the Papal Knights, controlled by Timothy Cardinal Dolan. Timothy Cardinal Dolan controls the gold hoard in the Federal Reserve Bank in New York City. And the Jesuits of Fordham control him. So the Jesuits have hoarded all this gold, using you rich men to do it. And you rich white men, and your servants, your lieutenants, certain rich Jewish men, have done this for the benefit of the Roman papacy to bankrupt the American people, put us strictly on credit, so that we own nothing, and everything we touch or do must be for the benefit of the military government that has hoarded all the wealth and power in its hands in Washington. So, the Spirit of God by James chapter 5 is speaking to you men today. Tom Monahan, Knight of Malta, rich Roman Catholic, one of the founders of Legatus, that Jesse Ventura won't talk about. We'll talk about Tom Monahan. We'll talk about Legatus, but not about Tommy. By the way, Tom Monahan wants to have his own Roman Catholic state in Florida. I say good. Go ahead. But don't come to my country, because we'll have to go to war. Because I know you want to kill us. You have heaped treasure together for the last days. That's what central banks are about. Heaping all the gold together in central banks, them issuing currency, so that people can hand around monopoly money and steal from each other every day, because the paper money ain't no good. It only circulates by confidence. It's a great big confidence game. Why? Because we've been robbed by these rich men right here. Now notice this. Verse 4, behold, in the last days is the 70th week of Daniel. It's the time of Jacob's trouble, last half of the 70th week. Those are the last days. They're heaping them together for the future 70th week of Daniel, yet to come. And if you don't believe the 70th week is yet to come, then you don't read the Bible literally. Last days are future. Of course, last days of Hebrews chapter 1, but there's the last days of the last days. There's the last days of 1 Timothy chapter 3. In the last days, perilous times shall arise. Yeah. It's the last days of the last days. But these last days, in the mind of the Hebrew Jewish Israelite writing this by the Spirit of God, has to do with the last days spoken of by the prophets. And that's the 70th week of Daniel, before the second coming of Messiah. You've heaped treasure together so that it can be used by the Antichrist when he finally comes to power. The slain Pope, risen from the dead to rule the world for 42 months. That's the end game of Satan's mystery of iniquity. Verse 4. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth. the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You rich men have stolen from us laborers. You steal our labor every day. Do you know what happens when you don't pay a man for his labor? You reduce him to slavery, because slaves don't get paid for their labor. And that's what's happened to the entire American population. We have been reduced to a condition of slavery, using fiat money in a confidence game that certain wealthy white men in London determine the value of the Federal Reserve note by determining the value of the gold every day. The value of gold never changes. What Federal Reserve notes will buy with that gold, that changes. Black is white, white is black. Verse 5, you have lived in pleasure on the earth. You've lived in pleasure on the face of the flat earth. That's right. And been wanton. You have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. There isn't anything you can't have. Isn't that right, rich men? You can have any woman you want, can't you? That's why you rich men have what's called kept women, which cost you 50 grand a year, 60 grand a year, but you got some pretty little gal waiting for you to take care of you sexually or whatever anytime you want it. She lives in her own place. She's a kept woman. And as economic times get harder and harder, you're going to see more and more of it. Women, especially white women, selling themselves out for money just to be taken care of by some evil, old, wicked white man that's rich by fraud and kept back paying the laborers. No, it's coming. It's going to get worse. We're going to have a demoralization here like we've never seen when this huge economic crash finally arrives someday. I'm not saying it's going to be September, but someday it's going to come. And these women will be selling themselves like candy to these white men that can afford to keep them because they're not worth marrying. Why would you marry one of them? Why would you want to have children with any of them? They're your enemy in the household. They're going to resist everything you tell them to do. They're not going to obey you. So why would you marry them? Why would you give them part of your inheritance? You've got to be crazy. So, the righteous judgment of God on these women, make them concubines. That's what you want to be, concubine? Concubine you shall be. You have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You have the most dainty, elegant meals that you can. You live in splendid mansions. You have long dining tables that you can sit and press a little buzzer on the rug underneath you. I worked for a Roman Catholic doctor in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he had a big house mansion like this. He had a garden like the Versailles Treaty, like Versailles there in France. And he had a little buzzer underneath his rug that he would press for his servant there to come out and wait on him or get him the meal, whatever it was. I was amazed. I didn't think people lived like that anymore. But I worked for this guy, did yard work for him. But you know what? He had a miserable life. His wife was a doctor. They fought. Their children that were sent away to boarding schools. What a horrible life. You can't be there as your children are being raised and watch them go through their phases and watch them grow into womanhood and manhood and delight to see that happen. But then there's a certain amount of remorse because they're growing up and they're going to be gone. But all those feelings of fatherhood, these rich men never experienced because all they care about is their money, their pleasure, and their power. Money, sex, and power. And you are no estoppel to that. White men. Common white men. Us commoners. The Bible goes on and says, verse 6, "You have condemned and killed the just, and he does not resist you." You know why the just don't resist you? Because we, for the most part, can't resist you. You have the power to seize our bank accounts anytime you want to. Just seize that account. Bang. All his checks bounce. Now he can't pay his property tax. Now he can be kicked out of his house. Now he can put all of his stuff in storage if he can afford a storage area. Well, maybe we'll charge him with a superfluous crime so he has to defend in court. You white men have completely wrecked the just and oppressed us in every way. You promote food that poisons us, full of GMOs. You spray our skies with metal and aluminum and whatever, God knows what else is up there, so that we'll get sick and have sickly lives, unproductive, and then die prematurely. That's what you rich men are doing to us. You rich men sell off our lands. Sell off our lands in Idaho to Japan and China, so they can build a 50 square mile little civilization right there in Idaho. You sell our lands off. You take our treasury bills and you sell them off to China, so that China is becoming to own this country. You sold our land, our country, right out from underneath us. That's what you wealthy white men have done. This is what Andrew Jackson warned about in his great farewell address. I have a friend that says he was a thug. He was no thug. Man, he saved the day. He restored gold and silver coin. He erected protective tariffs, and he shut down the national bank. And when he did those three things, the country went into black, and we were no longer in debt to any nation, thanks to Andrew Jackson. And he's a thug? No. We have a wonderful heritage. But you white men have destroyed it. You're destroying the Protestant Reformation. And it's not like you're giving it to the Chinese, because we know you run the Chinese too. We know you white men of Italy, you white power structure. Your most powerful men are there in Beijing and in China, enjoying the day there. You like it, because there's no black on white crime. There's no black crime in China. Blacks are not allowed in China. They don't want them to live there. Just like Japan, they don't want them to live there either. Oriental nations have never done one thing for the blacks. And yet you blacks hate us white Protestants and Baptists who did the most for you of any other people? No, you've been suckers for the propaganda of the white power structure to rob us. And this white power structure has robbed us of our labor. Robbed us of what is rightfully ours. Pursuant to James chapter 5. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Well, those cries keep coming up. Millions of the cries of white men going up to God. Lord, they're stealing from us. They're stealing our labor. We can't afford to have a wife and a home. We can't afford to have children. So this is one of the big temptations for abortion. So we have the abortion genocide going on here. And you know who was behind the government financing abortion? Robert Drinan, the Jesuit from Georgetown, that wicked sinner. Encouraging Protestants and Baptists to abort their children, bringing upon us innocent blood, that God must punish us with the shedding of our own blood, which cleanses the blood of the innocents off the land. That's the only way it happens, apart from repentance and true faith in Christ and a true sorrow for our sins. That's what's coming here. But the theft of our labor is going on every day in this country for the destruction of the historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant and Baptist middle class. That's what the socialist communist income tax is about. Oh, everybody has to pay their fair share. Oh, no, the rich men, they don't pay anything. Their corporations pay peanuts because they can afford to hire CPAs and attorneys firms to figure out all the little loopholes and whatever they got to do to avoid all these taxes, and what they pay their legal fees in and CPAs is minuscule compared to what they would pay otherwise. The rich men and their corporations don't pay any taxes. I just learned from a gentleman last week who used to write corporations, and he knows all about these big corporations. He said, did you know Stephen Jobs committed his intellectual property as property of the corporation of Apple? He essentially became property of Apple Computer. You know how much money he got paid a year? $1. $1. The rest was all business expenses. That's how these rich men avoid income tax. Yeah, $1. The income tax builds cartel capitalist monopolistic corporations and drives the mom and pop's business out so that they can't compete with the big corporations who buy their products for peanuts from foreign countries in such huge, massive amounts. This is part of the destruction of the middle class and middle class businesses run by individuals through their own creativeness and labor and intellectual property. Everywhere we go, whatever state we might go to, there ought to be unique businesses run by the peoples of those states, where you can buy a special molasses or a special honey or a special type of dress or a special type of hat. Or there ought to be different cultures of different peoples throughout the country because of their race, language, and historical culture. But we can't have that. We have to have one faceless culture. So we got to do away with Confederate flags now. Can't have those around. And by the way, you black man down there in Memphis, Tennessee, you black governor down there, black mayor of Memphis, what do you mean black folks don't want to go and have a picnic under the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest? Why not? He was in the first Ku Klux Klan. So what? Had nothing to do with going after blacks. It had everything to do with stopping the Yankee carpetbaggers plundering the South and raping your black women. And it was Nathan Bedford Forrest who did away with the first Klan in 1869. He said it had become too violent. He didn't want to see these lynchings, so he did away with it. Yeah, all you black folk ought to say, we want Nathan Bedford Forrest in Memphis, and we'll go and happily have a picnic underneath his statue as he's riding his horse. What's wrong with you? Don't you read history? That would take some work, wouldn't it? And it would take some guts to advocate what's against the party line, wouldn't it? And you don't have it, do you? Just step and fetch it for the white power structure. I'll do anything the white power structure tells me to do. Okay, boy, hate the white man, hate the Protestant. I'll do anything it tells me to do. Yeah, boom, yeah. You're disgraceful. You're a disgrace to your black forefathers, 60,000 of them who fought for the Confederate South. Yeah. But now, all you black men are just as enslaved. You're more enslaved than the black men of the South were ever under their plantation owners. Just like us white men. We're more enslaved now than we've ever been. We now have universal equality in slavery because they rob us of our labor every day. And then they bring the Mexicans up here who work for peanuts, who outwork the blacks and outwork the whites, and they may make more money. They send it down to Mexico. And the people that hire them, they don't have W-4s on them. They just hire them straight and pay them straight. The income tax is to destroy white, Protestant, and Baptist peoples, robbing us of our labor. Be back. How we've been robbed of our labor. How we white men anybody else for that matter, has been robbed of our labor, and we white men ought to be angry about it. We need to stop being afraid, okay? We need to stop this fear and trembling over government. Who do you fear, the Lord or man? The Bible's clear. The fear of man bringeth a snare. It's a trap. Fearing men will trap you. But whosoever trusteth the Lord shall be safe. You got to trust the Lord in the midst of this cyclone of sin and oppression and wickedness. And we're angry about the fact that we've been robbed of our labor. We read in the slaughterhouse cases, this notorious case of the Supreme Court that I cover in my course, handed down in December of 1872 and finally logged in 1873. In this case, it's actually 3 cases combined into one. In this case, the judge was a 5-4 decision, and that wicked sinner, Unitarian, Christ denier, Justice Miller gave the opinion. You see how wicked men make wicked decisions? You see why you can't have wicked men in places of power? Because they're going to oppress you. Wicked men oppress us. And here's a classic example. Slaughterhouse cases. This case decided that the privileges and immunities provision of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment did not include the common law right to work. Well, fundamental rights. Well, if your citizenship, if the privileges and immunities of your citizenship does not include the common law right to work, which means it's a God-given right, and when you exchange your labor for goods, for money, or whatever it is, there's no profit and no gain, therefore it cannot be taxed. What you derive from your labor cannot be income taxed. That's what you have when you have a common law right to work. The right is common to all men. And nobody paid an income tax on the monies of their derived from their labor until 1939. That is a fact. I prove it in my course. Well, what did America do without the income tax? Oh God! We were a great nation without it. By the way, no socialist communists are going to be allowed in my country. If I find out you're a socialist, you're out. And before I kick you out of my country, I'm going to put a tattoo on your hand. It's going to say SC, Socialist Communist. You come back to my country again, and it's a death penalty. We don't tolerate socialist communism in my country. Any form of socialism, Fabian socialism, red socialism, black socialism, any of it, we don't tolerate it because it's creating mischief with the law. It's stealing. And the Bible's clear. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him work with his hands. And the great maxim of the 10 Commandments, which we're not under, but yet it's a guidance, it's a schoolmaster, thou shalt not steal. Well, this Supreme Court in 1872 with the slaughterhouse cases decided that, well, hey boy, hey there boy, you ain't got no right to work now, common law, right boy? That's not part of your privileges and immunities of citizenship, boy. Get over here, shut your mouth. Pick that cotton, boy. That's what they did to all of us white men then. And I don't know of any white men that ever got organized and said that slaughterhouse decision is wicked and we will not put up with it and we are going to declare our independence because the privileges and immunities of our old federal citizenship included the common law right to work as well as the Bill of Rights. And we're out of here. And every state should have declared its independence right then and there after this wicked, iniquitous decision. Well, our hero for the day, his name was Stephen Field. Stephen Field is one of the greatest Supreme Court justices we ever had. He has a holding opinion in the Pollock case of 1895, where they determined that this income tax they tried to put on the people was wicked, and he said, "Where shall it end? Where shall the conflict and the war between capital and labor ever end? They're to work together." And here's what Stephen Field said on page 110 of the Slaughterhouse Cases. This is Supreme Court reports, or I think this is U.S. He states, "And it is to me a matter of profound regret," this is his dissent now, "and it is to me a matter of profound regret that its validity is recognized by a majority of this court, namely that the common law right to work was not a privilege of citizenship. For by it, the right of free labor, one of the most sacred and imprescriptible rights of man, is violated." So that's what happened. They violated our right to free labor, our common law right to labor, to exchange our labor for agreed upon monies. And when that happens, there can be no income tax, when it's a common law right to labor. So you see, I believe that. And I went to the federal district court in Allentown pleading when I didn't want the IRS to get any of my books and records because I said I had a common law right to work, protected by the Supreme Court. I didn't know anything about the Carolyn Products case of 1938. They said, "Sorry, boy, you don't have the common law right to contract anymore that was protected by the Lochner decision in 1905. We ended that on April 25th, 1938, with U.S. versus Carolyn Products." So I was there like an idiot before Judge James Noel Gardner, a federal district judge who I kind of liked, and pleaded my case that I have a common law right to work, Judge, and therefore it's an even exchange of my labor for agreed upon monies, and therefore there's no income involved, and therefore the IRS should not be allowed to get my books and records because it has nothing to do with income taxing the wages of a man's labor. And I'd already been warned about this by the IRS agent. His name was Jim. I liked him too. So there I was in court making this eloquent pleading. And after I finished, the judge spent about an hour in chambers, maybe an hour and a half, I'd say at least an hour, writing his decision, quoting case after case after case after case after case, hoping and probably praying that this poor man in front of me would get the message that you don't have a common law right to work, Phelps. And that's what he decided, and he was right. I didn't have a common law right to work. I didn't have a common law right to work as a matter of privilege and immunities of citizenship, and I didn't have a common law right to work protected by the Supreme Court. All I have today is the privilege, if I was a U.S. citizen by statute, which I'm not, but all I would have today, all you have today is privilege to go out there and work. And because it's a privilege to work, whatever you make is income, and it's subject to the income tax. We do not have the common law right to labor, which right made this country great. When a man could keep the fruits of his labor, and nobody knew how much money he had, because it's nobody's business but his and God's. Making sure he gives the first fruits to the Lord, of course. Now notice this note that Stephen Field puts here in his dissent. He quotes, "The property which every man has in his own labor," says Adam Smith, "as it is the original foundation of all other property, so it is the most sacred and inviolable. The patrimony of the poor man lies in the strength and dexterity of his own hands. And to hinder him from employing this strength and dexterity in what manner he thinks proper, without injury to his neighbor, is a plain violation of this most sacred property. It is a manifest encroachment upon that just liberty both of the workman and of those who might be disposed to employ him. As it hinders the one from working at what he thinks proper, so it hinders the others from employing whom they think proper. Unquote. Smith's Wealth of Nations, Book 1, Chapter 10, Part 2. Our right to labor is a sacred, God-given right. And the property derived from that labor cannot be income, excise, privilege tax if it is a common law, God-given right of sacred labor. Going on. He states, Field goes on to state, in the Edict of Louis XVI in 1776, giving freedom to trades and professions, prepared by his minister, Turgot, he recites the contributions that had been made by the guilds and trade companies and says, quote, "It was the allurement of these fiscal advantages undoubtedly that prolonged the illusion and concealed the immense injury they did to industry and their infraction of natural right. This illusion had extended so far that some persons asserted that the right to work was a royal privilege which the king might sell, and that his subjects were bound to purchase from him. We hasten to correct this error and to repel the conclusion. God, in giving to man wants and desires rendering labor necessary for their satisfaction, conferred the right to labor upon all men, and this property is the first, most sacred, and imprescriptible of all." Unquote. He therefore regards it, quote, "as the first duty of his justice and the worthiest act of benevolence to free his subjects from any restriction upon this inalienable right of humanity." Unquote. You had the inalienable right to sacred labor. Now you don't anymore. Thank you, Supreme Court. You did it to us. Now you know the rest of the story, white men. What these white men of the Supreme Court did to us, serving the Pope. Remember, this is just 8 years after the Jesuits assassinated Lincoln. Don't you think for 1 minute those Supreme Court justices didn't know who did it? They knew the power of Georgetown University. He goes on. Quote, "Civil liberty, the great end of all human society and government, is that state in which each individual has the power to pursue his own happiness according to his own views of his interests and the dictates of his conscience." Whoa, the dictates of his conscience? That's called Protestant Reformation, freedom of conscience, the dictates of conscience. And Baptist, Calvinist First Amendment, the freedom of worship according to the dictates of your conscience, providing, of course, you're not calling for the murder and death of anybody else other than yourself, as do the Roman Catholic doctrines and the Muslim doctrines. The dictates of his conscience, unrestrained except by equal, just, and impartial laws, unquote. And where did he quote this from? From Sharswood's Blackstone's Commentaries. Page 127, note 8. And I have Sharswood, first volume. Volume 1 of Sharswood's Blackstone's Commentaries on Blackstone's Commentaries. Pennsylvania Supreme Court Justice, years ago. Great 2-volume set. But notice here, you have this inalienable right of labor. You used to have it, but you don't have it anymore. thanks to the Slaughterhouse decision in 1873 that said the common law right to labor is not a privilege and immunity of citizenship, 14th Amendment citizenship, and also the Supreme Court in the U.S. versus Carolyn Products of April 25th, 1938 that said you no longer have a common law right to contract that we protected under Lochner, and we overthrew Lochner with Carolyn Products. And so therefore, in 1939, we have the first Internal Revenue Code, and they're going to start taxing every man's labor. You like that? Do you like being income taxed for your labor, white men? If not, why don't you support this broadcast? Because it's only going to end when we're publicly voicing our disapproval to do something about it. Let's read some other quotes on sacred labor sent to me from Brother Kevin. Brother Kevin, thank you so much for this. Quote, a truly American sentiment recognizes the dignity of labor and the fact that honor lies in honest toil. Unquote. Who said this? Grover Cleveland, 24th President of the United States. Next quote. Quote, by rendering the labor of one the property of the other, they cherish pride, luxury, and vanity on one side. On the other, vice and servility, or hatred and revolt. Again, by rendering the labor of one the property of the other, that's called redistribution of the wealth, okay? That's what's done every day in this country. We're going to tax the whites to give to the blacks, so the blacks will be more dependent on Washington, and so the whites will be more dependent on Washington. You see how it works both ways? It's a brilliant Jesuit design. I said this in one meeting in Cleveland, in Chicago. Black lady got up and walked out on me. Well, I guess, the truth hurts, and we have to come to grips with the truth. It's stinging oftentimes, but we need to know it. Who said this? James Madison. By rendering the labor of one the property of the other, they cherish pride, luxury, and vanity on one side. On the other, vice and servility, or hatred and revolt. Yeah. That's what all the white men are coming to in this country. Hatred and revolt. The Jesuits are fostering it more and more every day. They want this. Quote, no man will labor for himself who can make another labor for him. Unquote. Thomas Jefferson. Yep. Why do we think we have this black unemployment? You know why? Because they can get a welfare check. That's right. And become more dependent on the white power structure. So that when they cut off the welfare checks and the Social Security checks and SSI, they can cite them to robbery, rape, and race war in every major city. That's why they're doing it. Black men, don't think for 1 minute this white power structure has any love for you when they send you a check. It's a hook, man. Let's read another quote. Quote, labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor, and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital, and deserves much the higher consideration. In other words, men ought to be paid for their labor. But the high Masons and the certain high Roman Catholics and the Jesuits, they wanted to make people in this country work for pennies. Hence the birth of the labor unions that started primarily by Protestants. Now, I'm talking about in-shop labor unions. I'm not talking about the big ones run by the Teamsters and the Mafia. I'm talking about men that had to unite in labor so that the businessman, the head of the corporation, wouldn't make huge, massive profits at the expense of his laborers. And by the way, any successful businessman wants to pay his laborers well, so he doesn't have to rehire new ones. So they like their jobs, So they like what they do. So they can support a family. And they love their employer. They love the company they work for. Any wise businessman educates his labor, treats his labor well, because without the labor, he's nothing. Going on. Labor was the first price, the original purchase, money that was paid for all things. Unquote. Adam Smith. Scotch philosopher and economist in the 1700s. Quote, dignify and glorify common labor. It is at the bottom of life that we must begin, not at the top. Unquote. Who said this? The black Booker T. Washington. You realize Booker T. Washington built, Tuskegee? And lots of white folks helped him out because he was a decent black man. He loved the Lord. He read the Bible. Booker T. Washington. Another quotation. Quote, the necessity of everyone paying in his own labor for what he consumes affords the only legitimate and effectual check to excessive luxury, which has so often ruined individuals, states, and empires, and which has now brought almost universal bankruptcy upon us. Who said this? Joseph Warren. Lived in the 1800s, from 1798 to 1874. Quote, dignity does not float down from heaven. It cannot be purchased nor manufactured. It is a reward reserved for those who labor with diligence. Pardon me. Who said this? Bill Hybels, from 1951 to the present. American minister. Dignity is a result of labor with diligence. I can remember when I poured concrete every day, I loved it. Last quote, let us not forget that the cultivation of the earth is the most important labor of man. When tillage begins, other arts will follow. The farmers, therefore, are the founders of civilization. Unquote. Who said this? Daniel Webster, U.S. Senator of the 1800s. How are you? Are you laboring today? Most likely you are. Are you getting paid for your labor? Most likely you are. Are they deducting it off your check? Most likely they are. Federal, state, and county, and FDIC. So that in the end, you barely get by. You know why? Because you have no common law right to labor. And if we ever want to get back to a productive, prosperous society with a vibrant middle class, we have to reinstill and restore the common law right to labor and thereby oust the socialist communist income tax. Then we will begin to rebuild. Then the rich will not steal from us, as James warned of in James chapter 5. Brother Eric John Phelps, so glad you tuned in today. Please go to my website, VaticanAssassins.org, 247worldradio.com. Purchase my book, purchase my PowerPoints. You can purchase Clear and Present Evil, very good history on the Jesuits. And you can be a monthly supporter. I ask that you support for $50 a month. I'm sure there's 100 white men out there that can give me $50 a month. That would be lovely. And pay for the radio station and a few other things. So, will you pray about it? Support this broadcast, because I'm the only one defending us, you, in our quest to not be totally decimated during the 21st century. Will you help me? Will you pray for me? Those of you who want to send your check, send it to P.O. Box RBT, Reformation Bible Trust, P.O. Box 306, Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, 17073. Send it there. I'll put you on my prayer list and pray for you daily. Lastly, I need your prayers, 60 seconds a day. Will you please pray for me? You may not be able to give any money, but give me some of your time. Pray for Brother Eric, John Phelps, that our ministry would prosper, that we would have givers for the radio station, and that the Lord would raise up vision to establish our own new nation somewhere in Pennsylvania, or at least North America, where we can preserve a little remnant of the white Protestants and Baptists who read the Reformation Bibles that built Western civilization, of which all the nations of the earth have benefited in one way or another. Will you help me? Will you pray for me? Please do. Please attend my private citizenship class. Go to the website. You can see where the classes will be given. I'm having one this weekend. I have two lovely ladies coming. We're going to have a very good time. And, of course, we always go out to Stout's Tavern, Stout's Restaurant, where George Washington went. It's kind of a memorial to him. So please take the class. Lastly, may the Lord bless you as you seek to do His will according to His Word. The AV 1611 Reformation Bible for English-speaking peoples. I'll be back next Monday. Until then, Maranatha, the Lord be with you. The Lord is coming. Any moment.
From Feature Story News in